Well, good afternoon, everyone. Too often, domestic violence thrives in silence, but not today. In a few moments, you'll be hearing from a survivor who is turning her pain into purpose. Those who are closest to the pain should be closest to the power, and those who are closest to the problem are often the closest to the solution. So it's important that we lift up the voices of survivors as we recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I'm proud to serve as our Commonwealth's first Black Lieutenant Governor. I'm even prouder to serve as Second Lady Blair Holmes Davis's husband and a dad to our new daughter, Harper, who is now 7 weeks old. Being a new dad is shaping my perspective in many ways. In 2022, 104 Pennsylvanians lost their lives to domestic violence. Each of these individuals was a beloved daughter or son. No parent should ever have to bury a child. The pain is unthinkable, and I can't even imagine it. Of those 104 lives lost last year, 67% of those victims were killed with a firearm. Some of you may know this, but gun violence is the issue that first brought me to public service. I was 15 years old, living in McKeesport with my mom and my sister when there was a shooting on my block. I decided to take action and get involved in my community, which led me on a long path to standing here before you today. I'm honored to serve not only as Lieutenant Governor, but as Chairman of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, the organizer of today's event. Since 2021, the Commission has provided nearly $250 million in funding for services for crime victims and programming to address domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. No matter what you look like or where you live, every Pennsylvanian deserves to be safe and to feel safe in their community. Kids should feel safe at their school, folks should feel safe walking down the street, and everyone should be safe and supported in their family and intimate relationships. We can't thrive as a Commonwealth if we're not meeting that basic need for safety and security. Making our Commonwealth safer is my #1 priority as Lieutenant Governor and as Chairman of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, and a top priority for the Shapiro-Davis administration. Our budget puts more resources into violence prevention and intervention and leans into supporting community-based solutions. But it's not just about making investments, it's about being smart and innovative with those investments. That's why last month we announced a $1 million in grant funding to conduct a needs assessment and identify gaps in supports for Pennsylvanians who are victims of gun violence. We must not leave any community behind. We must not leave any victim behind. Every victim, every family member who has lost a loved one to gun violence should receive the support and services to which they're entitled. At the end of the day, the governor and I firmly believe that government can and should be a force for good in our lives, that we can make our community safer if we're willing to work together. It's on all of us to come together to stop domestic violence, to protect victims, and support survivors. Now, I have the pleasure of turning the microphone over to a fierce advocate for victims and a survivor of domestic violence, Tiffany Hall. Thank you.
To Governor Josh Shapiro in his absence, Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis, the Pennsylvania Commission Executive Director, Mr. Mike Pennington, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence CEO, Susan Higginbotham, family and friends. I recall the memory as if it were that June summer day in 2005. I can hear his voice so calm and clear, "You're gonna die today." These were the last words that I remember before he reached for the first knife, proceeding with the intention which he had stated, to take my life. Something rang in my head. It was like the sound of a bell declaring the beginning of a round in a heavyweight championship battle. It was at that moment I knew that I was in for the fight of my life. I stand here before you today, blessed and thankful to be able to say that I won that fight. If that made you uncomfortable, if it made you uneasy, if it made you shift a bit, if it made you look at me and wonder and imagine that happened to you. Imagine the victims and survivors who have faced worse circumstances. Imagine those who hide in shame and remain silent for the fear of being judged because of the stigmas associated with being a victim or survivor of domestic violence. When it comes to tackling the complex and sensitive topic of domestic violence, the voices and experiences of survivors must be an essential part of those conversations. By centering our perspectives, we cultivate a deeper understanding of the challenges we face, and we ensure that any initiatives and any solutions that come forth truly are effective and inclusive. I had no clue what I would be returning home to when I was discharged from the hospital. I could only imagine my home looking like a bloody scene in a horror movie in which nobody survived, but not a drop of blood could be found. My injuries required me to be off work longer than anticipated, and sadly, I was terminated from my job. It was the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, in partnership with its service providers, that deep cleaned my apartment. They provided my lost wages, allowing me the time necessary to focus on my healing. The resources provided through organizations such as the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency ease the burden that victims and survivors already face. Survivors' participation in conversations not only validate our experiences, but it also paves the way for realistic and holistic change within our communities and amongst our policymakers. I want to leave you with this thought. October has been recognized as Domestic Violence Awareness Month since 1981. It is also recognized as Breast Cancer Awareness Month. How is it that one is shown more empathy than the other, when the results of neither are of the fault of that individual? No one ever asks a breast cancer survivor, what did you do to have your breasts removed? And no one should ever ask a victim or survivor of domestic violence, as those questions are asked of many of us. What did you do to deserve what happened to you? It is my sincere prayer that from this day forward across this great state of Pennsylvania, that we come together as partners and we continue to do the work to raise awareness about domestic violence. Thank you.
Thanks, Tiffany, and we're honored to have you here with us today and appreciate your willingness to share your story. It is vital that we elevate voices such as yours about the impact domestic violence has so we can improve responses and enhance supportive services. The bravery that it takes to stand in front of a room and share your story is remarkable. You are a symbol of hope for so many other domestic violence survivors. Good afternoon, everyone, and I'm Mike Pennington, and I'm honored to serve as the Executive Director of the Commission on Crime and Delinquency under Lieutenant Governor's leadership. Our agency has supported efforts to make communities safe for over 45 years. Facilitating delivery of service to crime victims is central to our mission. Whether it be domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, violence can negatively affect an individual's physical and mental health. We stand with victims of domestic violence and want to assure all Pennsylvanians that they are not alone and that there are programs and advocates ready to stand by your side. I would like to start by highlighting one of the main services that PCCD provides to victims. As Tiffany mentioned, the Victims' Compensation Assistance Program. As shared by Tiffany, the program is a critical financial lifeline for people who have experienced crime victimization. The program can reimburse co-pays, out-of-network expenses, and other out-of-pocket expenses. Eligible expenses under the program include medical and counseling services, forensic rape exams, loss of earnings and support, stolen cash, relocation, funeral costs, transportation, and crime scene cleanup. And the best way to file a claim is with the help of a local victim advocate at your local victim service provider. You can also submit a claim by visiting our website at pccd.pa.gov. Additionally, PCCD provides funding to local programs for the delivery of services. As the Lieutenant Governor mentioned, PCCD has provided more than $248 million in funding to deliver direct services to crime victims through the Federal Victims of Crime Act, provide procedural victims through the State Rights and Services Act and State Victims of Juvenile Offenders funding, and develop federal Stop Violence Against Women programs. Those programs help to engage in multi-system, collaborative response strategies to domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking that keep victims safe and hold offenders accountable. These programs are truly lifelines for folks who have experienced devastating and life-changing circumstances. I would be remiss if I did not also take a moment to thank the individuals across Pennsylvania who provide these vital services to victims. Thank you for the surely difficult but critical and life-saving work that you are doing in our communities every day. By working together, we can help turn victims of crime into survivors. Now I'd like to turn the mic over to Susan Higginbotham, CEO for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence, a central partner to PCCD in helping victims of domestic violence across Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Lieutenant Governor and to all of my colleagues and partners at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency for having me here today. But I want to say a special thank you to Ms. Tiffany Hall for sharing your story. It really points out the incredible strength and resilience that survivors have, and we're grateful for you. When the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Domestic Violence was established almost 50 years ago, the vision of its founders was that every victim of domestic violence in Pennsylvania would have somewhere to go in their own community to find safety and access services and support. I'm proud to say that today, PCADV's network of 59 domestic violence programs provides free and confidential services in all 67 Pennsylvania counties to nearly 90,000 victims and survivors a year. Since that time, PCADV's vision has evolved to one of a commonwealth where collectively we create a community that supports all Pennsylvanians and the human right to live healthy, stable, and rewarding lives free from intimate partner violence and all forms of violence and oppression. Achieving this vision requires not only providing intervention services to victims, but also striving to create meaningful societal change that will prevent domestic violence in the first place. Domestic violence is a public health issue of epidemic proportions. Everyone knows someone impacted by domestic violence. The prevalence is that 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and nearly half of all LGBTQ plus people will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Far too often, abuse becomes deadly. Last year, 104 Pennsylvanians lost their lives to domestic violence. Consistent with every other year for the last decade, firearms were the #1 method of killing, with 67% of victims killed by firearms. To help address the lethal nature of domestic violence, PCADV, with support from PCCD, adopted our lethality assessment program in 2012. Since its implementation, Pennsylvania law enforcement officials have conducted more than 41,000 lethality assessment screenings. As a result, nearly 18,000 victims have sought services from PCADV domestic violence programs. Connecting those at most risk of being killed by their abuser to domestic violence services is crucial, but not the only thing we must do to reduce the number of domestic violence homicides. We must ensure that people who abuse their intimate partners or family members do not have access to firearms. When a male abuser has access to a firearm, the risk that he will kill a female partner increases by 1,000%. Guns in the hands of domestic violence abusers is a deadly combination we cannot afford to ignore. In a single day in 2022, Pennsylvania's local programs answered 841 hotline calls and served over 3,000 victims. Those services include everything from emergency shelter and housing to therapy and counseling, from transportation to credit repair, from legal advocacy to assistance with public benefits. Every community and survivor has different needs and requires different types and levels of service. PCADV and our local programs strive to ensure everyone, especially those from typically underrepresented groups, has access to information and services that will help them find safety, obtain justice, and build lives free of abuse. Despite the incredible and tireless work of advocates at local programs, a lack of resources across the Commonwealth has led to some victims being placed on wait lists and survivors not receiving the services they need when they need them. On that same day in 2022, there were 386 unmet requests for services in Pennsylvania. We as a Commonwealth and as a community must prioritize domestic violence programs receiving the support they need to continue to serve survivors. Yet, we cannot address domestic violence with intervention alone. Domestic violence is not a private individual problem. It's a community problem that requires community solutions. By acknowledging this reality, we can collectively work towards ending domestic violence and creating safe, healthy communities for everyone. All of us, no matter our race, gender, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status, want strong relationships and healthy communities. We want all Pennsylvanians to feel safe, to live with dignity, and have a chance to thrive. At its core, abuse is about power and control in a relationship. But domestic violence does not happen in a vacuum. Poverty and power differences between people can make domestic violence far worse. For people who experience things like lack of access to safe and affordable housing, lack of health care, and inequities based on gender, race, and sexual identity, it can be even harder to leave or prevent an abusive relationship. When people have more control over their economic security, they have more power over their lives and more alternatives to unhealthy relationships. To help prevent domestic violence, it's important that we join together and take steps to assure that all Pennsylvania families, no matter what color they are or how much they earn, can get the basics, like a safe and affordable place to live and a job with a living wage. Prevention is possible, but none of us can do it alone. We can and we must come together to create communities where healthy relationships thrive and abusive ones don't. I look forward to continuing this critical work with our partners like PCCD and urge everyone here today to join our mission to create a safer Pennsylvania where everyone can thrive. Thank you all very much.
We must not leave any community behind. We must not leave any victim behind. Every victim, every family member who has lost a loved one to gun
have faced worse circumstances. Imagine those who hide in shame and remain silent for the fear of being